welcome to Win the Margins. Today, I'm pleased to have as our guest Dr. Daman Harris, who is a manager of professional development schools and IHE partnership for Arundel County Public Schools in Maryland. Dr. Harris is also co-director of a nonprofit Building Our Network of Diversity Project, or BOND project. Dr. Harris, thank you so much for being here with us on In the Margins. Appreciate you taking some time.
Yeah, I'm beyond excited to be here, David. I appreciate you allowing me to talk to you.
And of course, I want to mention that Daman also is the author of a new book titled The Antiracist School Leader: What to Know, Say, and Do. And of course, Dr. Harris, just thank you so much for being with us today. You know, my first question for you is, I was wondering if you could talk about your own educational background and why you decided to become an educator yourself.
Yeah, my own educational background started it perhaps even in the womb. My mother, I'm from Wilmington, Delaware. It's a small town out in northern Delaware, sort of considered the Philadelphia metropolitan area.
Yep.
And my mother was 16 when she had me. She's a high school junior, had me during Thanksgiving break.
Okay.
She was a really strong student. The folks around me surrounded me with love, and from what I'm told, educational sort of opportunities, always talking to me, asking me questions, showing me things to try to help push me along. It would help being, maybe, I don't know if it was because I was the first grandchild, but that might have been. We lived in a house with my aunts and my uncles and my grandmother, with a bunch of us there. My mother also wanted to be a lawyer. So she had me early. She went to school and knew that she didn't have the time, the capacity to take care of me and to go to law school. So my grandmother watched me and my aunts during the week, and I saw my mother. She went to college. Awesome. That's what I mean by, I think it was just in the womb. She went to college and would come home and see me on the weekends.
Okay.
But she only could get that 4 years. And then she had to hop out of school and come take care of her baby boy. When I was in kindergarten, ever since I can remember, people have treated me differently or extra special in my view, because I could read and write well, perhaps. But it was also, I think, just the way folks treated each other in my community. So my kindergarten teachers were my friends' mothers, and they made sure that they were on my back with love and support and pushing me. When I graduated from kindergarten, when I was promoted from kindergarten, they gave me a Charlie Brown dictionary for my present. And so that has just always been with me, folks there. And I write in the introduction of my book, the dedication page is dedicated to my aunt Casey, my mother's twin sister, who's deceased. And she, I have, my most prized possession is a book that she wrote, or that she gave to me when I was about 8 or 9, and wrote an inscription inside saying, essentially, there are some other words that are in the book, but essentially it was, Daman, stop being a knucklehead and read some stuff, right? Stop resisting the gifts that you've been given and the support that you've been blessed with. And so that is just indicative of emblematic of the type of support that I've always had from folks in my community from an educational standpoint. With respect to formal education beyond kindergartens, when I went to a couple private schools, a couple public schools, I was in counting kindergarten. I was in 4 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, 2 high schools. Never really found community until maybe my junior year in high school, my last stop, so to speak, in public schools, K-12. But I can't remember more than one Black or brown male educator who showed me the way. Although my skills were enough to get me a 4-year degree, a scholarship to my undergrad experience at the University of Delaware. And at the risk of just talking on, I'll just say I got kicked out of undergrad and I lost my scholarship um, due to my poor grades, and went back to work in my the community center in which I grew up. And I was a latchkey supervisor there, supporting the kids before and after school. And while I was there, my supervisor, Miss Heidi Beck, who's actually working now for the university that I got kicked out of, which is ironic, but she was my supervisor and said, you work pretty well with the kids. Have you ever thought about being a teacher?
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't. And one of my friends from up the street was in school to be a teacher, same university that I got kicked out of, University of Delaware. And he made a connection. His name was Terrell. Can't think of Terrell's last name. Walker. But he, so man, wherever you are, brother, I think he lives in Jersey now, man. I love you for it. He pointed me in the right direction to a gentleman named James Shaw, who was supportive of kids of color who were trying to be teachers at the University of Delaware in a program called Aspire. And James, all I did was call him, and he came to my community center to meet me. And he sat with me and talked with me, and he said, I think that your head is on straight, and I'm ready to support you if you're ready to work hard. And he helped me get grants that were equivalent to my scholarship, so I still didn't have to pay for school. And I became a teacher through the work and the love and the connections of the folks around me who love me.
And I was wondering about the journey to the PhD. You talk about, of course, having to leave your undergrad experience. There are many, who face what you face, who, might not ever think that a doctorate could be possible for them. And so I was wondering to talk a little bit about the journey to the doctorate after that.
Got you. And so with that, it came with, I finished my undergrad in 1996. So I graduated high school in 90s. When I started school, got kicked out, like I said, got back in. I was done by 1996 with undergrad. Started teaching. Through teaching, I was just steered through, I was teaching in Maryland, in Baltimore County at the time, public schools. And I was just sort of steered towards getting a master's degree. That's just what we were supposed to do as teachers. So that part was just kind of perfunctory. Mm-hmm. I got it and wasn't sure quite what I was going to get it in. I thought maybe I'd be a school leader. So I thought maybe that, but I didn't end up getting my master's degree in that. I ended up getting my master's degree in reading, so I could be a reading specialist. And subsequently, I got my admin certification down the road. But while I was before I got my master's degree, I finished my master's degree in 2004. And in 2003, I was a teacher and just noticed how much that our folks in central office, like my principals, my school leaders, assistant principals, they deferred to the folks in central office as the experts. Even when I'm telling them, right, it was one of those things like you're going to believe me or your lying eyes type of thing, right? Even though I'm telling them this is my experience, these are the experiences of my kids and their families. This is what the reading that I've done has shown that could be effective. This is why I want to do this thing, or this is why I've tried this practice. It didn't matter if the folks from central office said differently. And I also noticed how our folks in central office, sitting in our little meetings and conference rooms, they deferred to the folks who were the so-called experts, right? Consultants and external folks who come out and say one thing or another about the things we should be working on as a school. And it didn't always make sense to me. And when it really hit the I was about to say the fan, but like when things really, the light bulb went off for me is when one of the folks who was an external person took a bunch of, well, a central office person, took a bunch of trade magazines and articles from them and put them down on the table in front of us at the group who was in that conversation about our school leadership. And this person said, "This research says this." I don't even remember what it was. And I know at that point, I knew that wasn't research.
Mm-hmm.
That was nothing empirical about what she showed.
Mm-hmm.
They were articles from trade magazines and stuff like, and I got love for educational leadership, right? I wrote an article for them last October or October of 2022. I have love for Education Week. I wrote some stuff for them too. I have love for all of those things. What I also know is that stuff is commentary on empirical literature. That
Yes.
stuff is not empirical literature. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it was like, I got to do that. And so I told my partner at the school, my colleague, who was my counterpart, and said, I'm done here for a minute, man. I'm going. I need to go get a doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I can do that. Right. I want to help make these types of rules because these folks don't know what they're talking about, or they're at least treating me like I don't know what I'm talking about. And so I ended up calling, and man, all my answers are really long. I know this is supposed to be a podcast, man, but like,
it's all right, man.
Yeah, my life story is
go ahead.
twists and turns and stuff. But so so I talked to our folks in central office, and it turns out we had a sabbatical option in the school district where I was, so I could take 2 years off, still be an employee, but get my 2 years, going to work on, take some educational leave, and get paid a little bit, get paid about 2/3 of my salary. Since pandemic, I don't know if as many schools are doing that anymore. They're still in some of these union contracts, but I don't know if they're all being. But anyway, back then we were allowed to do that. And so I called, like cold called. I told my wife, we were living in Baltimore at the time. I said, I'm going to pick a couple of universities and see like what we think. And she said she's from the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia area. She's born and raised mostly in DC.
Mm-hmm.
And so she said, let's go down there. I said, okay, that's fine with me. So I called the University of Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
I just called the education department. It said, hey, I'd like to talk to somebody about joining the doctoral program.
Mm-hmm.
And it so happened that the person who answered the phone, she said, well, there's Dr. Dennis Hirschbach happens to be standing here next to me. He could talk to you. Because we don't usually do this, but he happens to be there.
Okay.
And so he talked to me just like Mr. Shaw talked to me when I was trying to get back into undergrad. And he said, you seem like something similar to what Mr. Shaw said. Like, you seem like you had a good head on your shoulders. Come down and talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down to talk to him, and he said, I can help you. I can help you get in. And because my grad school, I didn't have a master's degree yet, although I had some courses. And he said, don't worry about it. We can figure it out. If you're ready to work, I'm ready to support you. And he got me in there, and I was solitary. My high school, my junior year and senior year high school, I was bused to the suburbs. So it was a mostly white, wealthy sort of group. And I was in the smaller group of kids of color that were from poverty. So the University of Maryland, the University of Delaware was the same way. Goucher College, where I got my master's degree, same. And University of Maryland, same experience. So the difference was when I got to College Park, I was a lot more secure with who I was. And so I didn't join anything. I wasn't really connected with organizations. I connected with some people, and we formed our own little affinity group of folks who just were interested in supporting each other. And those folks happen to be folks of color, as far as I can remember, and there may be a couple others. And it took me 10 years to get the degree. So I did my 2 years. I did a lot of my coursework, and when I was trying to do my my comps, one of my professors Um, God rest her soul, Betty Malin. She's really strong. Made me a super strong writer. I took a couple courses from her, um, but she didn't feel I was quite ready to move forward, and it was after. Well, no, it was either the comps, and then she just felt like I wasn't ready, and so I went back. I think it was my comps. If not, it was like my first draft of my dissertation. And she said, you know, you're just not quite ready. So the rest of the committee said, you're not quite ready. We don't have consensus. And I just stopped. Like I got frustrated and I felt like what I was doing was good enough, was certainly good enough to pass the comps. But looking at the dissertation examples that I had seen from the folks who came out of Maryland, my stuff was, you know, equivalent to their stuff or better.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of cases, well, in several cases. And so I just got frustrated and just left, just dropped it. And I did not leave Maryland in terms of being a matriculated student. I just paid them because it must have been past my comps because I was a candidate. So I was just paying them a couple grand a semester, and extending my stay. I didn't feel as supported as I thought I should be. So I went
Mm-hmm.
and did some other stuff. So I went back to school, to grad school, or to Goucher College, where I got my master's degree. I got my master's degree along the line while I was working on the doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back there and just took a couple more courses and got my admin certificate and became an assistant. Well, eventually I became an assistant principal and a principal. And then I moved again. I love Betty. God rest her soul. But I moved her off my committee, and in 2 years I was done.
Okay.
Like somebody told me, you need to move her off your committee. Now I thought it was being disrespectful because I felt like I owed her something
Mm-hmm.
because she had really, really strengthened my writing. But I moved her off, and I think I was done in 2 years, maybe.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
And now some people do look at me like I'm an expert on stuff. So
But
now
now,
sometimes when I do go places and I talk, I do get treated like I saw these other folks treated. But I am careful to say, and I said this in two different settings yesterday, to a group of folks and one to an individual doing some coaching and mentoring. I am very good at making quick decisions and saying things with conviction.
mm-hmm.
I am great at that.
Mm-hmm.
I am not great at making the best decisions or saying the right things with conviction.
Okay.
And so anytime I'm talking to you, I need you to push back. Anytime I'm presenting ideas to you, to this group, I don't care what my role is, where I fall on the hierarchy formally, I need you to poke holes in those ideas because that'll make this stuff stronger. So don't think, and I think that is directly attributed to, I think now that we're talking, I haven't made this connection before. But back then when I was thinking, these people don't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, just because they're in air quote leadership, like then nah, right? Our kids' lives are at stake. So we can't do that.
The book that you just recently released, of course, is talking about anti-racist education. And of course, as you know, anti-racism is like a political hot potato in so many
Oh
places,
man.
right? You know,
Yeah.
there are places like in DC, Maryland, where the reception, I would say, is warmer, to such topics. But, if you're going into, Texas and Arizona and some other places, parts of the country, there is stiff resistance to anything that looks like, diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. And so you have a number of individuals questioning the value of anti-racist education in America. And so I wanted to ask you, what is the value of anti-racist education from your perspective?
So, like I said, I talk to groups every now and again about this type of content or something similar, and folks often say to me, like, I feel that this is right. Like, I know this intuitively makes sense, and the data that I have at my school or my district or my state supports a different focus, but I don't know how to do that. Right? Like I don't know what the first step is. And so folks say, like, where do I start? What steps should I take? What things should I consider? I don't even know how that works. Right. But I know I've seen white supremacy in action in my space, or I know I need to build a climate of inclusivity, or I know I need to understand what some of these other groups who are anti-woke or anti-CRT or anti-racism, if that's a double negative, we can do that. Like, but I want to understand them better too. Like, how do I do that? So, and that's what this book is. So this book is step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Not quite linear, but you could take it that way if you are really at a foundational level. So it is for people who recognize that we have changed, or let me say this. So it's what I call stagnant demographic hierarchies. If you were to consider or envision multi-line graph, and it is going to take some data over time. Now we got 4, 5, 6, you name it, different lines. They each represent race or ethnic groups. Now, let's think about this multi-line graph as being something positive, like achievement scores, graduation rates, you name it. Now, you already know if those 5 lines that trend over the last 100 years, you already know which group is which. Now, let's flip it and say that this group, we're going to keep the same lines the same way. We're just going to change the title or the topic to a negative outcome, dropout rates, suspensions, ineligibility for folks in high school. You know what the different racial ethnic groups are without a label. And it's been like that for 100 years. And we have changed. And you recognize, like I'm speaking to you in the audience who say, why this book? You recognize that you're in your district, in our country, right? We've changed educational leaders. We've changed curricula. We've changed superintendents. We've changed focus to certain instructional techniques. Let's call it science of reading is hot right now, right? We've changed vocabulary, vernacular, like words like grit, right? Like we've changed a bunch of different things. That demographic hierarchy is unchanged. It's because we've been fighting on or nibbling around the edges of this issue. We've been given Advil, right, to a cancer. So we're fighting the symptoms without fighting the disease. And that's what this is. So you recognize that the symptoms of dropout rates, lower achievement, you name it, are the results of policies and practices that are endemic to our system. And those things, those policies and practices are based or are undergirded by white supremacy culture. That's the disease. And I'm careful to pay attention to when I use the word equity versus when I use the word anti-racism. Because sometimes the word equity is used, and I've said this in other settings, sometimes the word equity is used to make this work more comfortable for the practitioners. And it's like the equivalent of a spoonful of sugar with the medication.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was saying earlier, white supremacy is not a fever, it's a cancer.
Mm.
So you do not heal cancer with sugar and
Mm-hmm.
kind words.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it takes work and it's uncomfortable on your body.
Yep.
Um, and you come out stronger on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And one last thing, you don't cut off any limbs, hopefully, um, to make that healing possible. Hopefully, you try not to. And sometimes those limbs, in my metaphor right now, are members of our family
Mm.
in schools. So sometimes folks at the university level or at the school district level, the LEA level, we are thinking this person's racist
Mm.
because they don't want to do the work. So we're cutting them off. Nah, that's our family. They think the way they think because they have different life experiences than you do, right? And then I do. So it's on us to create some joint life experiences together so that we can shape our collective viewpoint, right? And do what's best for our kids and their families. And this is what this book tries to do. It tries to offer you. There's a chapter on embracing resistance and encouraging dissent
Mm.
because it makes your ideas better and you pulls the members of your family closer.
You know, you talk about white supremacist culture, which ultimately is what many people who are interested in, you know, DEI issues are fighting. And it's interesting, you know, you talk about your background being in Maryland school systems, even going to the University of Maryland, and I too here, I'm in Maryland as we currently speak, and it's just interesting, you know, white supremacist culture kind of rears its ugly head in different ways, in different places, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you reflect upon your experience at University of Maryland, I say, you know, whenever I'm over there, it's like, okay, it's a different flavor. Um, and so dealing with that is different than dealing with that you know, Arizona and Texas. It's just
Yeah.
different. And I
Yeah.
think in my experience, of course, it's important to understand the nuances because it's not openly in your face. Don't mean it doesn't exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not impacting your work. There are people who see the value of any racist education, you know, who are committed, who are passionate, but they're fighting some heavy headwinds, right? Their jobs are threatened, right? You know, they're facing opposition at every turn, yet they feel, as you feel, right, that this is critically important, that if you omit, you know, any racism from curriculum, we're just going to, you know, continue the cycles of deprivation and poverty and all the things that we are seeing because we're not understanding the root of these ills. And so, what
Mm-hmm.
has your counsel been to the people who want to do something but feel because of their job security and other reasons that they can't?
Yeah. So it's a couple different things, probably. The thing I'll start with is you need to educate yourself and really commit to the work. And that's actually the first chapter of the book. Educate yourself and commit. Because there are things that it will be helpful for you to understand while you are going into these types of conversations with folks who may feel resistant or systems like my buddy Ashford Hughes, who is the director of equity in Metro Nashville Public Schools. He said recently we were in a conversation with a group of us, and he said, "Systems gone system." Right. So you are in this space, like the system is going to be before you confront it or the people therein, who are the worker bees in this system. Sometimes it's us, or people that look like us. Um, you need to understand a few things, right? So a couple of one word that I stress in my book is homophily, right? And homophily is a gravitation toward the familiar,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a part of who we are, it's of the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
We all gravitate toward the familiar,
Mm-hmm.
and now once you do that, now, in that book, and we're talking about educating yourself to commit, I think I got that from Jessica Nordell's End of Bias. I don't see it on my shelf. I know it's around here somewhere though.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a great book if folks are thinking about how to understand the why some of this stuff happens. And then it becomes an in-group, out-group thing, right? Where we say the people that we're closest to, who have the most characteristics like us, or at least the most significant characteristics like us, those are the members of our family. Those are the members of our tribe, our group. And the other people, the outsiders, are that out group. And we don't trust them like we trust our folks. We have to understand that, like, as folks who are going to do this work. So that means that when we have been, how can I say it? So we have been socialized to think that race is the primary characteristic that we need to consider with this homophily. So white people have to hold on to a perceived white culture or whiteness, right? And white is a race, it's not a color, right? Black is a race, it's not a culture. But we are socialized to believe that that's the case. And so there's a lack of trust there. And there's a lack of, in another book, in terms of educating yourself and committing, is The Power of Us by, I would say, J. Van Vevel. And I forgot the last name of the co-author. But they talk about this in-group, out-group phenomenon and how once people have decided their team, they root for their other team, the outsiders, to lose more than they root for their own team to win. So if we are socialized to think that race is our primary team, folks unconsciously or otherwise may be thinking, the folks who are in control, boards of education, boards of regents at universities, that these kids of color, they're the out group. Of course they're not as smart as our folks, as the other kids. Of course they don't work as hard. So when they don't get the internship, it's not about people not picking up or allowing Jerome to get the interview, right? Or allowing Taekwon or Shanika to get the mentorship or the mentor. Right? They're just thinking that must be because they don't work as hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you go into that work, you have to understand but that does not make them evil people, right? It makes folks a little misguided, perhaps. It doesn't make them like less intelligent, less moral, any of that. It's the human condition. So now you have to work using the human condition or using some of our the way our brains work to resist some of that and to help them resist some of that. And that is where more of the work comes. So how do you do that? Right? Well, first you can cast a vision to the folks who are in these groups, and you can say to them, this is where I think we can be, and it's associated with our values. Right? And we can get together on, or like collectively, this is where we want to go. We agree, and here's how we can get there. Right? And you can design some professional learning activities that are around this, formal or informal stuff, to give people different life experiences, be it at the Board of Regents level, the graduate faculty level, the LEA partner level, right? You can do that to help folks see what I was just sharing, how race is this social construct that has very real implications, but it ain't real. And it's what we do with this homophily. Like, why didn't we choose height as the people want to be our group? Right? We didn't, because that's what Ibram Kendi says, right? In Stand from the Beginning. Mm-hmm. And so I keep naming things. So I don't want people to think that these are my ideas. I'm getting these ideas from other folks and just putting my spin on them. So anyway, I'm sorry again, man. I keep going on and on. I just got so much passion about this stuff. But the point being is now you can design some professional learning to help people get some different life experiences to change their viewpoints because they see that we have some of the same values. We just don't have some of the same experiences. And then you can teach folks how to embrace some of the resistance that they might encounter with this because it's coming. Like you said, it may come passive aggressively, right? In some spaces, but it's coming nonetheless. You know, Paul, it may come in the form of Paul Gorski calls equity detours,
Mhm.
where folks say, "Hey, can you give me more information about that? I'm not sure I'm ready to move on that." Right? Well, wait, I know you're talking about kids of color, but why don't we talk about kids in poverty? Right? Or why don't we talk about kids who are multilingual learners? Right? Like that sort of stuff is still, you know, some of those are equity detours, although we do have to acknowledge intersectionality in
Mhm.
this work. Right? You have to show people that you can elevate some of the work that you're doing to promote some of these equitable or anti-racist causes. And there's a chapter in there about elevating anti-racist curricula and instruction because that piece is necessary in order to show that our folks are capable um, and can be connected to positive educational outcomes when given the right chances. And lastly, one of the chapters there is evaluate your anti-racist impact.
Mhm.
And so when you can show folks the data that shows, hey, when we tried this, these were positive outcomes, even though those outcomes were different than what you predicted because we were looking through a lens of white supremacy, right? Or a deficit mindset related to our kids, students, or their families. Um, that that data is helpful because, and it needs to be a variety of data, and their recommendations are in the book. But those data are helpful to do what Adam Grant in his book Think Again describes as being a scientist, right? So he talks about and he writes about when leaders are trying to persuade other folks, we often take I think he calls them 4 P's. I think maybe they're 3 P's. So there's the prosecutor posture where we tell people, my idea is right because yours is wrong.
Mhm.
Or it is the preacher posture where we say, my idea is right because it just makes sense. It's in my heart. Like, of course it is. I believe it with all my heart. Right? It's got to be right. Or the politician who says, let me show you what's in it for you if you believe what I believe. Let me help you that way. And what Adam says is his research has led him to believe that is none of those three are the optimal way to sway folks' opinion in some of this work. He says we need to think like scientists, so not a P at all, right? We need to use the data and show people the data that supports the issue and then help them draw the conclusions.
My last question, we talked about your journey, the different stops along the way, even throughout your whole life. Last question is this. When did you decide that you want to write this book? At what point in the journey you decide this is the book I want to write? And what ultimately are you hoping to achieve with this book ultimately?
Let me make sure I'm gonna write down what ultimately, so I'll come back to that. So I decided to write this book in the fall of 2020.
Mhm.
And at the time, I was reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by
Mhm.
Ibram Kendi.
Yeah.
And it changed the way I thought about this issue. I've been doing what I was calling equity, what some people call equity work since like 2001.
Mhm.
So it was always okay for me to think that I'm doing my part. in this work. And when I became a school leader, at the time in 2020, I was a principal, and I was an elementary school principal. And things were always okay with people saying, I love kids and I want to do what's right by kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, as a school leader, I was good with that, as long as, and I could coach them along with the um, their instructional repertoire. What changed for me with Ibram's book was, he said, you are either being racist or anti-racist at every moment of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And you are either being anti-racist, which means identifying issues in the system, tearing that part out, or reconfiguring it and reconstructing in ways that support racial and ethnic equity, or you're being racist.
Mm-hmm.
And those things aren't fixed characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
They are moment to moment propositions based on my behavior. And so I told my staff, this is our work now. It is no longer good enough for us to say, and I write about this story in the book. I say it's no longer good enough for us to say we love kids. I shared that same story I told you. Like, we have to believe that there's either something wrong, because a whole bunch of things have changed over the years. We have to think that there's either something wrong with our kids and their families, or there's something wrong with the system
Mm-hmm.
that's creating these and recreating these demographic hierarchies. So I'm choosing to believe the latter, and everybody here needs to be on board with that. It ain't good enough just to love kids anymore. You need to help me identify the problems in the system and break it down and rebuild it. And that's what we're going to do to support the kids in our schools and their families. And I'm telling you now, in January, because in February, or because in March was our involuntary transfer season, or voluntary transfer season. So you got a chance to go if this isn't the ride you want to be on. And I had already spoken to my supervisor about this and told her, like, hey, this is the work for me right now, and I'm ready to get fired over it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not stopping, but I will revise based on, anything anybody wants to share to inform. And so that is when the work happened. At the same time, back in October 2020, my nonprofit, we had what we called a writer's room. The Bond
Mm-hmm.
Project, we had a writer's room. It was a bunch of guys of color who just shared ideas that we were writing, and giving each other feedback. And the seed of this book started there. And so when um, uh, an acquisitions editor from Solution Tree reached out to me
Mm-hmm.
and said, hey, we saw you speak here. We saw you write some blog or something somewhere, a couple places, and we think you have a book or two in you. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I sure do. You got any ideas? They said, you pick. I said, this is the journey I'm on right now, so this is what I write about. And so my book definitely weaves my professional experience and features some other folks highlighting their professional experiences with this work, and elevating the really strong aspects of it, but also recognizing the struggles that folks have with this. Now, ultimately, what I hope folks get from this
Mm-hmm.
is a conversation. I want people they don't have to be a school principal or a superintendent to be a school leader.
Yep.
Right? Anybody who can influence change is a leader, and they are at every level of the school district, right? And from secretaries to paraeducators to classroom teachers, custodians, bus drivers, you name it, PTA members. I want you, or just community parents, I want them to bring this to their schools, their districts, and say, what do you think about this?
Mm-hmm.
Let's be on the record, because here's what I think about this. Like, I hope that those types of conversations are occurring with my book. Secondarily, this is a guidebook for folks who need some first steps in this work. And even if you were, well, some people say, well, I've already taken some first steps. I need some next steps.
Yep.
This is a guidebook for that. Give me a call. We can talk about it.
Well, Damon, I just want to say thank you so very much for taking some time out. Fascinating conversation. I know that our audience very much is grappling with these issues that kind of brought you to the point of writing this book and that you continue to work on. So just want to thank you for your time and appreciate your perspective. Thanks so much, Damon.
Appreciate you, David.
Take care.